everyone. It's really nice to be here today. It was quite a trip from the West Coast here with connecting flights being canceled and things like that, but I'm happy to be here. I want to thank the folks at Impact Florida for having me here today, and I also want to thank TNTP and the great people there for also inviting me to be here with you today. I wanted to share with you that some of the stuff that we are talking about today and that we have been talking about isn't new. The fact that algebra has been a gatekeeper to opportunity is something we've known for a long time, right? And it's not just a gatekeeper to opportunity for individuals, but it's also a big challenge for us as a nation. It always has been. Innovation has slowed down. Our financial prowess has slowed down. A lot of things are in peril when we are not investing in the right things. And right now, we know that technology plays a huge role in what we see and what we are experiencing in society. So it's not just, what I'm talking about today is not just about investing in individuals. That's an important part of what I'm going to talk about. But it's also about our future as a nation. So one of the things that is going on right now that I don't want to ignore is the fact that we are dealing with, more now than ever, teacher shortages. People are leaving the field left and right. Not just teachers, administrators as well. The teacher shortage in math, special education, and science isn't something new. But right now, it's amplified because of the pandemic. And there's a lot of different things that contribute to the challenges that we're facing. It's not just money. It's not just the pandemic, although that has played a big role. But the fact that teachers feel like they're not successful because we keep telling them they're not successful. We keep looking at data and saying that we're not successful. We have a lot of initiatives that we throw at them left and right. That doesn't make them feel successful. We have a lack of focus. That doesn't help either. So part of our challenge as leaders is to grapple with the fact that we know all of these things, and we have known all of these things. The question is, how do we act on them? How do we act on them in a thoughtful way? Because in 2008, the National Mathematics Advisory Panel was a panel put together by the U.S. Department of Education that brought together the top researchers in the country. And they looked at all the research that existed. And the research was clear then, and it's clear now. And they predicted that these teacher shortages were coming, that retirements were happening, and that we weren't investing enough in the future. Like all of these things we knew back in 2006 when this research was being done. It was published in 2008. We knew these things. Our problem isn't that we don't know what the challenges are. The question is, can we come together to find solutions? So I want to talk a little bit about a few things today. Can we have the slides back up, please? This is a few pictures. The handsome guy on the far left is me. The guy next to me is my younger brother, right after me. He's a real estate agent and investor now. My brother on the top is Jonathan. My brother on the bottom is Joshua. And my sister is Patty. We lived in the same household. We faced the same challenges, but we have very different outcomes. Extremely different outcomes. So you see me there on the left picture in the blue polo and my brother Jonathan in the green polo. I'm in the blowing out the birthday candles in the right photo. My brother Jonathan is next to me in the red. My brother Joel in the green. And Joshua's up there on the being held up. He was the baby. Jonathan and I are sitting there next to each other. We live in the same household. We both started school not speaking English. We were multi-language learners. Some people call them English language learners. We were very poor. My family immigrated from Mexico. My parents came here because they wanted to give us the opportunities that they didn't have there. Yesterday when I was on my way to the hotel, the Uber driver that picked me up was an immigrant from Venezuela. We were talking a little bit about his experience here in the States. And when I was growing up, some of the challenges that we faced were we were poor. We moved around a lot. My brothers and I went to 7 different schools before high school. So we were moving a lot. Sometimes we were living with other family members. Sometimes we were homeless. Sometimes we were living out of a van. It was very difficult at times, but for my brothers, it was especially difficult. There was something that helped me along the way. And that one thing positioned me and my brother that came after me very differently. And it was my first lesson in education. In 2nd grade, I was tested for GATE. And so was my brother right after me. So no matter which school we went to, we were always placed with highly effective teachers. We were always given additional supports. We were always in enrichment programs. But my 2 younger brothers had none of that. Can we go back to the picture of, yes. I'm in the blue, my brother Jonathan is sitting next to me in the green. I'm here speaking with you today. I have a great career. I do well. My brother Jonathan is incarcerated. My brother Jonathan has been struggling with addiction for the past 7 years, living on the streets. My brother Joshua, who's the baby being held up, he never learned how to read. He's 27 years old. He also lives on the street and has been struggling with addiction. I often wonder how my life would have been different had I not been tested for GATE. I wonder about that a lot. I often wonder, why is it that we have to have a test to determine who gets access to a high-quality education? Why? So let me move on to talking a little bit about what I've learned as a teacher. Let's forward the slides a little bit here. That's my wife and I. And those are my kids. Played a lot of sports. I made sure they stayed busy and did a lot of things so that they didn't end up like my brothers. That was always on my mind. My daughter was born when I was 15. My son was born when I was 17. My wife and I are still married. We're exceptions in a lot of ways. In so many ways. And people oftentimes congratulate me and celebrate me. And typically when that happens, I think about my brothers. Why not them? Why only me? All right. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk to you a little bit about something a little more happy. Teaching and learning. I consider myself a teacher forever. I also consider myself a leader because I can have a tremendous impact for the 150 to 70 students that are in my classroom if I'm a teacher. But I can't fix the systemic issues. I can't fix them from within the classroom. That's why I left the classroom. I left the classroom because of my brothers. Because of what I learned about access and equity and systems and structures and practices within school districts and how they impact lives. They don't just impact learning, they impact lives. And I want to focus on the positive. They impacted my life in a positive way. I had access to a high-quality education, period. There were a lot of things going on at home. I don't blame education for my brother's outcomes. My father worked really, really hard. He was an auto body mechanic. He did custom work. He was doing okay. But then he had an accident at work. He broke his back. He couldn't walk for a long time. Eventually, he got a settlement for the injuries because he couldn't work. But my father kept all the money at home, not at the bank like most people. And one day it disappeared. It was stolen. It was gone. All of it. The money that he had that he thought he was going to use to buy a home was now gone. And that turned into alcoholism. And then it turned into drug addiction. And then it turned into abuse in the home. Physical abuse. Started with verbal abuse, but it turned into physical abuse. So that's just a little bit of context about what was going on in my home. So that there were things going on at home that definitely contributed to the path that my brothers were on. But there were things happening at school that contributed to my path. Now, I'm not advocating for giving everyone a GATE test. I'm advocating for ensuring that everyone gets access to a high-quality education because it makes a difference. Can we go to the slide with a lot of happy students? That's me. Those are my students. That's when I was in the classroom. Some of those students are my geometry students. Some of those students are my Algebra 2 students. Some of those students are my AP Calculus BC students. At your tables, I want you to answer these two questions. What do you notice? What do you wonder? Go for it. What do you notice? What do you wonder when you look at those pictures? There are some folks with mics around. I'd like to hear from some of you. Please, what do you notice? What do you wonder when you look at those pictures?
Good afternoon. Carolyn Nelson Goddard, Florida PTA. One of the first things that we noticed was everyone looks so engaged. And we attribute that to you.
Thank you.
Let me add to that. I'm wondering what in the world they're doing because I want to do it.
What else? Feel free to shout it out.
I wonder, is anyone struggling or do they all know what they're doing?
It's a good wondering. Thank you.
I notice that it appears that the children are doing a lot of the work and you are looking in.
Yeah. I already know math.
Facilitate.
The bottom right-hand picture, the young lady that's sitting there with the white bun on her hair, her mother actually came here from Kenya as an immigrant. She's brilliant. She went to Princeton. One of the things that I'll share about my students in a bit is the universities that they began to attend that historically at my high school no one had ever gone to, and how that all got started. So, I want to make sure that this point is very clear. There's so much that happens in school districts, and it's all important. I mean, let's think about what we just went through. We need strong operations to keep kids safe. We learned that during this pandemic and returning to schools. We knew that before as well, but it was amplified. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we never lose sight of is that what really matters, what really, really matters, is what's happening inside of classrooms. The instructional core, right? If we want students to be successful, then what matters is what are they being taught and how are they being engaged in learning. That's it. That's all that matters. All the other stuff that works around that should be working in support of that. What students learn and how they're engaged to learn, that is what matters. Let's go back to the former picture. One of the things that I didn't hear asked was, I wonder what they're engaging with. Because here's the thing. I want to make one thing clear. Sure, the kids look happy, and sure, they look engaged, but I could do that and put below grade level work in front of my students, just so that it feels good. But I would never do that. Absolutely not. I wasn't trying to look good. I wasn't trying to have people pat me on the back. I don't care about that. I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to transform the way that we do education, to ensure that 100% of kids, when we say all, that we really mean all. In my class, all meant all. And when I had my first year, the very first year I taught AP Calculus, I had 2 students who didn't pass the test. And I felt like a failure. I had 2 students who didn't pass the test. It was my first year teaching AP Calculus. Let me back up a little bit and tell you how I got there. So one day, I was 21 when I started teaching. And I started teaching at a school where 80% of the students looked like me. They were Latino or Latina. But there wasn't a single Latino or Latina teacher in the math department. There wasn't a single black teacher in the math department. So one day, I was walking by the teacher staff lounge, and my colleagues, who, I thought they were really nice guys, because they invited me to play golf with them, and I didn't know how to play golf. But they invited me to play golf with them, and they taught me how to play golf, and so I was with them. But I heard something really, really disturbing. I heard the AP Calculus teacher at the school for the past 15 years saying, our students can't do calculus. Our students aren't motivated. Our students don't do the work. Our students have so many gaps in their learning. And I thought to myself, wow, the same guy that believes in me, I know there's some good in him, because he believes in me, and I hear it all the time. So I wonder what's going on here. Why is he getting jaded? Why is he beginning to build these negative views of the students that are in front of him? And then, there were 3 other colleagues with him, and one of them said, well, maybe we should just get rid of the AP part of calculus and just teach regular calculus. And then another one said, well, why are we even offering calculus at this school? And I thought to myself, am I really hearing this? So I went over there, and I said, hey, guys, what I'm hearing is that we need some support or some ideas around how to motivate students. And what they said to me is like, they laughed first. And they said, oh, you'll get it eventually. You're still wet behind the ears. And I was furious at that point, so I just took some deep breaths and walked away. Then I went to my principal, and I said, I want to teach calculus next year. And he said, do you know what you're asking me to do? And he's, I was only 3 years in, and these teachers had been at the school, all 4 of them, for over 20 years. You know this story, right? The veteran teachers, the seniority, right? Like, we're not going to do what's right because we don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? But my principal just happened to be Latino. And he asked me, Francisco, why do you want to do this? And I said, I want to show them what's possible. He smiled and he said, okay. He said, it's going to be a big battle for me. I have to deal with the union. I have to deal with human resources. I have to deal with all kinds of stuff. But okay, because I actually want to see you do it. I don't think anyone's going to believe in our students until they actually see what they're capable of. So he let me teach AP Calculus next year. He was a smart man, though. He gave him a section and he gave me a section. We each started with 20 students. By the end of the year, the school year, I had 24 students. 4 of his students had jumped ship. Because they heard, oh, we're learning. He had 3 at the end of the school year. He was mad at me. He was mad at me. But then the AP Calculus test results came in that summer. It was my first year teaching calculus. All of the students in my class passed except 2. He had 3. 1 passed. With the 3. In 10 years at that school, the past 10 years, they had had a handful of students pass the test. The next year, I was determined. I said, all right, goal number 1, checked off. I've proven what's possible, but now I'm going to prove that not only are they able to pass the test, but that they're capable of excellence. So the next year, I was determined my students are going to get 5s on the test. And that's it. Anything less than a 5 is unacceptable. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I'd figure it out eventually. I didn't get all 5s the next year. But the next year, I had 36 students in my class. He didn't have AP Calculus anymore. He and my other colleagues didn't talk to me anymore. The other thing that happened was that not just 4 of his students jumped ship. It was actually 6. I lost 2. So the other thing that happened was I went to the counseling department and I said, next year, no student drops my class unless I say so. Because you know what happens. Students, they begin to struggle. They go to the counselor. The parents call the counselor and they pull them out. And I said, no, no one. Not even the parent can pull them out of my class. And they were like, who do you think you are? And so then they were mad. I wasn't making a lot of friends. I went to my principal and I said, I need you to back me on this. He said, okay, I will. So he backed me on that too. And no student could leave my class anymore. I want to make a connection to teaching here and this challenge that we're facing. When students came into my class, the way that I thought about it was, if they even thought for 1 second that they belonged here, they belong here. And my job is to make sure that they stay here and that they feel successful here. That's it. I think the same way about teachers. If they came to the profession, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why they became teachers. But there's so many things in education that can make teaching not fun, not enjoyable, right? So let's focus there. Let's focus on making sure that we're thinking about teachers the way, I heard someone say at an institute before, we must believe in our teachers the way we want them to believe in our students. And we must invest in our teachers the way that we want them to invest in our students. And I wholeheartedly believe that. Wholeheartedly believe that. So, all right, back to the calculus story. Next year, 36 students, all of them pass. 25 of them have a 5. A few of them have 4s and 3s. That's not good enough. I want all 5s. That was what I was determined to do. Because for me, it was like excellence. That's the bar. Nothing less. And of those 36 students, there was one that I'll never forget. She came to me the day before the exam, and she said, Mr. Villegas, I'm not going to come tomorrow. I mean, what do you mean you're not going to come tomorrow? We've been working for this all year. She says, everyone's smarter than me in the class. You convinced me to stay in the class even though I tried to get out like 5 times. And I don't want to be the only one that doesn't pass. My response to her was, if you don't show up tomorrow, you didn't pass. So what are you worried about? Right? Like the worst thing that can happen is you don't pass. Don't worry about it. And I know that you will, because my assessments are far more rigorous than those assessments. And all it takes is 50% to get a 3, so you're going to pass. Don't worry about that. Work hard and try to get a 5 tomorrow. And then we, it was time to, can we go to some of the pictures up here? That one. Look at the bottom left. Or sorry, bottom right. Look at the bottom right. You see those kids there? They're running to take their AP Calculus exam. Seriously, that's what they're doing. Because in the morning when we were going to take our exam, the official day, we all met in front of my classroom. We ate some snacks together. We drank water. And then we ran to get the oxygen flowing. And I said, and we're going to run and smile at the same time. Because there were 2 rules in my classroom. We're going to work hard, and we're going to laugh hard. That's it. Have you ever walked into a classroom and feels like the life has been sucked out of it? The air has been sucked out. It's like, I don't even want to be here. It's very common in math classrooms, actually. Right? I wanted the polar opposite of that for my students. Not because anyone taught me that, because when I went to school, I sat in rows. I sat at the front. When a teacher passed out a worksheet, I was the first one to finish. And then I put my head down. But then some of my teachers would come to me and say, can you help other students? Okay. I didn't know how. I had to get some coaching because sometimes I would say silly things like, oh, this student doesn't really get it, and I don't know how to help them. And so the teachers would teach me how to help them. But the reality was that I began to notice from an early age that so many students were struggling with math. When I was young, I didn't want to be a math teacher. I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted to be scuba diving. I wanted to be under the sea. But I realized that I wanted to help, right? Like I wanted to help sea creatures. And then I decided I want to help people. And they're both worthy causes. Don't get me wrong. But I think what happened with my brothers really kind of pushed me towards people, helping people, cultivating the genius and the talents that people bring. That was my goal. So as you can see here, these are kids who are happy and they're doing all kinds of stuff, algebra, calculus, geometry, all that stuff. But they work together all the time. Why did I want them to do that? Because when I was sitting in classrooms in rows, I sat at the front, I got everything done, and the kids in the back had their heads down, and no one ever said anything to them. And I thought, what does that mean? My teachers loved me, but they didn't care about them. That's the way it felt for me, because they just let them put their heads down and stay there. So as I thought about teaching, can we go to the next slide, please? I think about, I have all kinds of notes. I just brought you one, but I have cards and letters, and now I have my students on LinkedIn writing me stuff all the time. But I highlighted that little blue part there because students would always bring me these notes every single year, and parents would bring me stuff because they were happy. They were like, oh my goodness, my child is excited about learning math. I've never seen this before. But I highlighted that part because it ends with saying, I will never forget your effort towards our education. My students knew. My students knew what was important to me. What was important to me is that we worked as a team, that we were successful together, and that we failed together, and that we learned from those failures. But we were going to do it together. It was all of them. It wasn't just some of them. It wasn't the ones that showed up and did most of the work and most of the talking. No, it was all of them. I sought out the quiet ones. I sought out the ones that were struggling. And the one thing that I did was I structured my class in such a way where 4 days a week we were working hard on tasks, and Fridays they were working in groups, and I had a little desk right outside my classroom, and I was meeting one-on-one with every single one of my students, and sometimes I had to prioritize the students who were struggling because I couldn't get through all 36. But I met with them every week. I held them accountable. If they didn't do an assignment or some task that I gave them, I asked them, what do you need to complete it? You're going to complete it. That's out of the question. You're going to do it. The question is, what do you need to be successful? And I run into some of my former students every now and then, or they message me, and they say that those are the things that they remembered. You held us accountable, but you did it with love. Right? And that's what they remember. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to shift a little bit to talk a little bit about the implications of this. When we're thinking about ambitious instruction, some of you potentially have read Principles to Actions. It's a book published in 2014 by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. They describe the type of teaching that you see in those pictures that I was doing as ambitious teaching. And they have these 8 math teaching practices to go along with that. They also have these 6 guiding principles that are really important for school and district leaders to be aware of. But I really believe this here. In order to get to a place where we actually have this happening in classrooms, first of all, teachers need to know what it looks like. And they need to get that in multiple modes. They need to see it happening. They need to experience it as learners themselves. And they need to have descriptive language that helps them understand the different phases along the journey. So that's, when I look at that first bullet point, oftentimes people think that because they do one PD and then send people on their way, that people know what it looks like. And I've learned the hard way, through failure, that teachers need a lot more. They need to see it, they need to experience it, and then they need a lot of support on the journey. Professional learning is not just this event that happens. Professional learning is a journey. What happens in between these events? I have a team that includes coaches, and I'm hiring more coaches. Right now my team is 12, but I have 5 open positions for coaches. My team will grow to 17. I don't manage the coaches directly anymore. I have 4 directors that work under me that manage the coordinators and coaches, but I invest in coaching. I invest in coaching because I know, and I've seen it work, I know the difference between, we have 20 schools that we manage at the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. We're a nonprofit organization that works within LA Unified because we believe that the majority of students in this country go to public schools. So we're not going to branch out and start something new. We want to support the district with whatever conditions exist in the district. We have just a few things where we have some autonomy. Those autonomies are curriculum, assessment, and hiring. That's all I need. You give me those 3 autonomies, I can work in an innovative space. But within the district, the curriculum is set. And the way that it's adopted, this is a district, second largest school district in the country. When I started there were over 650,000 students. Now there's just over 540,000 students. And second largest school district in the country, we have learned that if you don't provide the right type of support when it comes to understanding what this ambitious teaching and learning looks like, then we're just spinning our wheels. It's an effort, we're trying something, but it's not actually having an impact. without an impact, then we're just doing stuff. Right? If things aren't changing in the classroom in terms of what students are learning and how they're learning, then we're not having an impact. That needs to change. And I'll say this quickly. When I was an AP Calculus teacher, I wasn't chasing test scores. The reason that I wanted my students to earn 5s had to do with the two things that I felt I never had as a child: hope and confidence. Those were the two things that I know are present in every household living in poverty often, at times. Hope and confidence, those two things are hard to come by when all the time you're struggling, when all the time you see people around you struggling, when things get good a little bit and then things fall apart again. But I wanted my students to feel confident. I wanted my students to feel like they could accomplish anything, and I wanted them to go into STEM fields. I wanted them to go to elite STEM universities because I did my research. I knew that the quickest way to upward mobility was to become an innovator. That's it. Innovate. I knew what the future held because that same report from 2006 talked about the jobs of the future. The jobs that Dr. Alicia Smith-Arriaga talked about this morning, they're here now. More are coming, but we've known about this. We knew that this was coming. The second thing that teachers need is they need to believe that their students can manage rigorous tasks. Right? So I haven't said this yet, but I want to say something very clearly. Curriculum matters. It really does. When I was an AP Calculus teacher, I went through textbooks, and none of the textbooks aligned with the rigor levels of the AP Calculus exam. So I had to write my own curriculum. But that's not scalable. You see, I would spend 16 hours every weekend preparing and planning and writing, and then 3 to 4 hours every night after teaching. I was young. I was in my 20s, so I could do that every day. No problem. But it's not sustainable. I also had to make a lot of sacrifices to be able to do that. So sometimes we'll assume as leaders a lot of things. Oh, well, we can't give teachers a curriculum because they want autonomy. Right? And sure, autonomy is important, but only to a certain extent. Question is, what are the bare minimum things that we're not going to do differently? Right? And what are those? For me, it's like, we're not going to put below grade level work in front of our students. We're going to put grade level work in front of our students, and then we're going to do what Dr. Arriaga Smith talked about this morning. We're going to give them just-in-time supports. Because guess what? This idea of teaching below grade level work at the beginning of the year, it never works. I tried it in the classroom. It never works. By the time they need it, they've already forgotten it. And usually I used to teach it the same way that they used to learn it the same way they were taught when they didn't learn it. Here's the procedure, follow the rule. Well, guess what? They didn't know how to follow that rule. And there was no conceptual understanding to fall back on if I didn't understand. If I can't remember when I'm supposed to flip the fraction and when I'm supposed to have common denominators and when I'm not, if I don't have these rules to remember, or if I can't remember these rules, what do I fall back on? That's the problem, is mathematics is not just about rule following. Mathematics is about problem solving. It's about mathematical thinking, critical thinking. It's about learning to understand the world around you. That's why mathematics was invented. So these two things are what teachers need. Two things. So let's not forget that. This is really important. There's an article there that you can access, but the most important thing that I'll share with you is that I've seen this in action. If we don't address beliefs, then it's difficult to make progress, right? Teacher dispositions, teacher beliefs. Oftentimes, it's not beliefs because I hate my students or I dislike it's not that. It's just that I haven't seen it happen. I don't know that it's possible. I hear teachers reflect on that all the time. They'll say things like, I didn't really think that my students could do that. The other day, I was meeting with a special education teacher, and she said to me, hey, Francisco, you know what? I realized something. I realized, and this was beautiful, I realized that my students are capable of so much more, but I just wasn't giving them the opportunity. And this curriculum has pushed my thinking, because now I put a task in front of them, and I've taught them some routines, and they just go. And they're talking about the math all the time. This is not an inclusion class, this is just a special day class. And I walk in that classroom, and it's beautiful. The kids are talking about math just like they're talking about math in the other classrooms. For me, the number one thing that I try to address as a leader is variance. Because variance in what students learn and how they are learning is the single biggest problem that I see across classrooms in the system that I work, and in the systems that I support outside of LAUSD schools. The same challenge when I walk classrooms. It could be 4 6th grade classrooms. I go from classroom to classroom to classroom. They're learning something different. Some are learning below grade level work. Some are learning at grade level work. And their experiences are so different. Sometimes they're just learning in rows and the teacher's talking for 54 minutes. I can't even take it. And then in other classrooms, students are deeply engaged in learning. They're talking about it. They're having fun, right? Those are the types of things that we're looking for. But it can happen in any classroom. Sometimes we just don't even give students an opportunity to do it. That's the challenge. Sometimes we even create barriers to access as systems leaders. It happens all the time. We put tests in place. We put teacher recommendations in place. We put all these things in place to keep kids from accessing the things that they need to be successful. So I don't know that that's happening in your district, but I invite you to examine your systems and your practices and think about that. Are we giving kids access, or are we keeping them from access? So can we go to the next slide? So I want to just share these at a very high level. These are the things that I attribute to my success as a teacher. I had high expectations and positive beliefs of my students. My instruction was effective, sometimes highly effective. There was rigorous and high-quality curriculum. And then I prioritized a few things for my students. I knew that identity was really, really important. Identity matters. It's not some soft, fluffy thing. It matters. Everyone in this room has an identity. When Dr. Arriaga was speaking this morning, she asked a question about, like, do we see ourselves as math people? And we were laughing about it. But I know that we all don't see ourselves that way, right? And that sometimes we're okay with that. So we need to change that narrative, and prioritizing identity is really important, because our identity has a lot to do with our confidence. It has a lot to do with our beliefs in ourselves. It has a lot to do with what we do and what we don't do. So identity really matters. Relevance matters. Motivation matters. And I hope that we all believe this. Kids are not supposed to come to us motivated. It's our job to motivate them. Right? Plain and simple. Who's going to come motivated to learn about calculus? Oh yeah, I want to go learn calculus. That's not what my students were saying. They came into my classroom scared, afraid. It's my job to motivate them and to get them excited and to have some fun doing it. Let's go to the next slide. So here are 2 key points that I want to leave you with. Continuously examine your systems and practices with an equity lens. Equity work is a journey of continuous improvement. And then take action if you're seeing things that are inequitable in your system. It's simple. And this one is a little more blunt. Don't allow gatekeeping. Get rid of it. And I say that passionately because I always wonder about how my life would have been different if a teacher, because that's what happened, a teacher recommended me for the test. If that teacher had not recommended me for that test, how my journey have been different. So don't allow the gatekeeping in your districts. People will come up with all these reasons why we need to have them. But if you're not giving students access to rigorous instruction, to rigorous coursework, then your systems are simply inequitable. They are. So let's go to the next slide. Here's a question that I want to leave you with. This is from Principles to Action, 2014. Notice that it's very similar to the other quote. What do we need to do? We need to alter traditional beliefs about what students are able to do and about how mathematics is learned, and practices, instructional practices, district level practices, school level practices, right? All the structures and systems that we create as leaders. Those are the things that I want to leave you with. Now, I want to give some time, and there's going to be people with mics around. I want to give you some time to just ask questions about some of the things that you might be wondering about that I've talked about today. And before you do that, this is a teacher move. I'd like you to talk to one person at your table about something interesting you heard or something you might be wondering about. Just turn and talk to someone at your table.
So our table just had, we had a question about your former teammates. Did they ever come around, and how would you recommend collaborating with a team of resistors or working with a building full of resistors?
Not all of them came around. The two that didn't left the school eventually, because eventually they felt isolated. You see, the way that they used to talk about our students was okay by everyone. It was fine. That's what we did. But until someone began to challenge them and actually show them what was possible, it was fine. It was like, that was what they talked about. But then when people began to see what was possible, many of them began to say, like, all right, how do we work together to make this happen in every class, right? And I had a colleague who was an ex-Army officer. He went to West Point, and he taught me about this school called Exeter Academy. That's where I learned about problem-based learning when I was a teacher, and then I started using it. But he brought that idea to the team. You know, a lot of what I see in Francisco's classroom is exactly the type of thing that used to happen at Exeter Academy. And that's an excellent school. We should be doing the same things here. And so little by little, it began to build momentum. It took years, but it happened. And change doesn't happen overnight, right? So what I would say is, I wasn't very thoughtful with my approach. I was 22, 23 years old. I was just saying what was on my mind. Sometimes I was angry. But now I know how to be more thoughtful with my approaches. So I would say, bring people together, believe in them. You have to start with believing them, because if you're already counting them out, it's no different than when we count out students, right? Believe in the teachers that you're bringing to the table. Believe that they just need to see it, that they need to learn some things, and that they'll get there, right? But eventually, the scales will tip one way or the other, right? And most of the time, the scales are tipping towards just, hey, let's keep doing what we're doing. It ain't working, but we're comfortable doing it, so let's just keep doing it, right? Eventually, the scales will tip. I hope that's helpful. Happy to chat more. Other thoughts, questions that are coming up?
On the topic of gatekeeping and, giving all students the opportunity, your AP Calculus students that you spoke of, how many of them would have traditionally been classified as they're not ready for that class?
I love your question, because I actually had that in my talking points and forgot to talk about it. So thank you. When I talked about how enrollment quadrupled, right? It's very rare for either a program is growing or it's being successful. But for it to do both is very rare, right? But I wasn't going to stop. I needed more and more and more and more students. So guess what? They weren't signing up. They weren't signing up for the class. I had already removed the teacher recommendation. That pissed off more teachers, by the way. But I had already removed that as a need. You could fill out your teacher recommendations. But if a kid says they want to be in this class, they're going to be in this class. Fill them out. I'll read them. I did. I didn't mean that in a disrespectful way. I just meant my priority are the students. And if they want to be in this class, they're going to be in this class. My problem was I couldn't get enough of them in there. So what I started to do was I started to go look at, it was the only data point I had, sadly, at the time, but I went to go look at test scores. And I went to second grade. I'm a calculus teacher. I went and looked at test scores, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade. I know somewhere along that journey, something went wrong. But if I saw a glimmer of hope, I went and found those students, and I had a conversation with them. Hey, I was looking at your test scores, and I noticed that when you were in third grade, you did really well in math. Tell me what happened. And then there was a story. There was always a story. There was always a story. It was either something happened in my family, something happened at home, or something happened in my classroom. Right? But I felt at times defeated because I was like, I'm only getting 10 more students? That's not good enough. I'm going to have to teach for 1,000 years before I ever reach my goals if we're growing this slow. So I went to go find more students. And then the other thing I did, to the other question that was asked earlier, I asked my colleagues, I can't do this alone. Can you help me? And many of them said, yeah, how can we help? We need a bigger pipeline. We need to build a pipeline. A pipeline that isn't like this, closed, that you can't get into. No, it's an open pipeline, because you all know, if a kid comes to me and says they want to be in calculus, they're going to be in calculus. But the pipeline needs to be there as well. So then we began some vertical articulation, and then they began to ask me, what are your students struggling with in calculus? And then we began to talk and have these real, authentic conversations about our curriculum. And we began to make changes. But sometimes it wasn't about the curriculum. Sometimes it was about our instructional practices. Because some of the trig teachers, they really like this plate activity with all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, do your plate activity. But do your kids know how to develop the unit circle at the end of that activity? Because if they don't, maybe we should reconsider that plate activity, right? So things like that. But yes, thank you for asking the question. Really, look for anything that tells you that students at some point really liked math, they wanted to do something with math, and invite them back in. Trust me, this was hard. I had to come into school on Saturdays often. I had to stay late often. And I wasn't paid for it. That's wrong too. But I wasn't paid for it at the time. But the reality was I was in it for the kids. I wanted to help my kids. I wasn't worried about that stuff. But what I did was, there were kids who didn't know how to solve a two-step equation. And they were in my calculus class. There were kids who didn't know exponent rules. For those of you that forget where that happens in math, that happens like in Algebra 1, right? There were kids that didn't know these things. There were kids that struggled with fractions. It didn't matter to me, because I knew how to teach those things. All I needed was a little bit of desire to learn, and then I could take it from there. It was a journey that we were on together, right? But it's possible. It's I've proven it in my own experience, and I know there's a lot of amazing teachers across the state, in Florida, across the country, that are doing excellent work. That's why I feel like the biggest problem we have in education is variance, because we don't tap into the great talents that we have. Oftentimes we're looking outside for solutions when the solutions exist in our schools and in our districts. There's excellence happening there. Let's go observe it. Let's structure it so that we can learn from each other. Long-winded answer. I think we have time for one more with a short-winded answer.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciated your commentary connecting identity to learning, and wondered if you could give us some concrete examples of things you've used or seen or recommended that really help to bring students' identities into the classroom.
Yeah, thank you for that question. First, I'll start by saying that there's a book that I really, really love. It's called The Impact of Identity in K through 8 Mathematics. They have these 5 equity-based teaching practices in that book that are really helpful as a start. I'll share with you what I thought about in my classroom when I was thinking about identity. I thought about how I always wasn't confident. But when I was in math class, I was always confident because I was the first one to finish everything. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying math is about speed. I just had a fast processor. Doesn't mean I was any smarter than anyone. But what I tried to do was I set the bar high. I had conversations with my students about how I believed in them. And I had conversations with my students about how if I was the only one that believed in them, and this likely wasn't going to work, I needed them to believe in themselves as well. But I also knew that that wasn't easy. So every time they struggled with that, when they began to say even something small, like, oh, this is too hard, or oh, I shouldn't be here, they knew that they were going to have a conversation with me. So they stopped saying things like that in my classroom. But the reality was that it's complex work, but the most important thing in teaching, when I think about teaching, is relationships, connections, right? And so those connections were there. And because students would open up to me and share openly how they were feeling, then I had a lot of data to use to help them, to build them up. But the most important thing of that was, how do I help students believe in themselves? Because I already believe in them. I need them to believe in themselves. So what I did was, every single time that they were successful at something, I would celebrate it. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. That's what I would do. The small things. I wouldn't celebrate stuff that wasn't like, that great. I would celebrate those small things that were moving in the right direction, right? I wasn't celebrating speed or anything like that. I was celebrating, hey, today you did your homework. Wow. I'm impressed. Let's keep this going, right? Things like that. And then eventually the identity pieces came from students feeling successful, right? That was it. If I feel successful, my identity is strong. If I don't feel successful, no matter what stuff I do around that, it's likely I'm not going to feel very strong or confident. I think I'm over time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco.